Pesachim, Dafim Vav through Yud Beis. On Davav, the Gemara brings a halacha. Hamotze chametz u'beiso b'Yom Tov. Someone finds chametz in his home on Yom Tov. Kofel of a kli. He covers it with a keli. Normally, a person's supposed to burn chametz, destroy chametz. So if he finds it in a Chol HaMoed, he just burns it. Certainly, if he finds it before Yom Tov, he should burn it. But on Yom Tov, you're not allowed to burn it because it's havara shelo l'tzarech. It's not considered a need. You're allowed to burn things on Yom Tov for ochel nefesh, for other needs of Yom Tov. You're allowed to light fires. We light candles. We cook. But you're not allowed to burn things for other reasons. This is not an acceptable reason to burn anything. And it's muktzah. Chametz is muktzah because you can't use it on Yom Tov. So you can neither burn it nor move it. So you cover it with a kli, so you shouldn't inadvertently come to eat it. If you'd be allowed to burn it or move it out, you wouldn't be allowed to rely on covering it with a kli. You would have to burn it or move it. But since on Yom Tov you can't do either of those two things, you cover it with a kli until Chol HaMoed, or until the end of Yom Tov, if it's the last day of Yom Tov, and then you burn it as you're supposed to. Poskim debate whether this halacha is talking about only a case where you did bitul chametz, you were mevatel the chametz, and therefore it's not so imperative to burn it because you won't be over bal yirah bal yimatzeh. Therefore, in that case, it's good enough to cover it with a. In that case, it's good enough to cover it with a keli. But if you didn't do bittul, and then there's an isur daraisa involved in bal yirah bal yimatzeh, so some posts can say that in that case that would override the isur of muktzah. You'd be able to at least take it out of your house to avoid bal yirah bal yimatzeh. And some say you'd be able to throw it into the river. Well, you're not doing a malacha. You're just carrying it out of your house and throwing it into the river, or throwing it into the basic kisei, which destroys it, or to crumble it up and disperse it in the wind. You'd be allowed to do that to avoid bal yirah bal yimatzeh. Some posts can go even further, and they say that if you didn't do bitul and there's an issue of bal yirah bal yimatzeh, then you can even burn it, because even though you can't burn things not l'tzarech Yom Tov on Yom Tov, this is tzarech Yom Tov, because having chametz in your home with an isur daraisa, that's a heter even to burn it. And when the Gemara says kofel of kli, that's when you did bittul. So it's not really so imperative to burn it. Then you rely on the kli. But if there's a real issue of bal yirah bal yimatzeh, some posts can allow tiltul muktzah. Some posts can even allow burning. It's considered tzarech Yom Tov. Other posts can say no. The simple reading of the Shulchan Aruch, the Mishnah Berurah says, is that the simple reading of the Shulchan Aruch is that you always do nothing more than kofel of kli. You just cover it even if you forgot to do bittul, even if there's a question of bal yirah bal yimatzeh. The Mishnah Berurah says, the Achronim say, that's the minhag. On Yom Tov, we don't touch the chametz, we don't burn it, we just leave it there, we cover it with a kli. If someone has a minhag like the second shita, then you can rely on that minhag. But this only applies to chametz gomer, real chametz. You just have something that's a chumrah. You found a piece of wheat in a cooked dish, you're afraid maybe it's chametz. Then according to everyone, you're not allowed to burn on Yom Tov because that's not real chametz. So for chumras, you can't burn things for chumras, you can't light fires on Yom Tov, even if it's for a religious reason. If it's only a chumrah, you can't use fire on Yom Tov. If there's a non-Jew available to ask him to be metaltala, to ask him to move it and throw it in the river or do those things, then that's okay, even if you did bittul, because even though it's not bal yirah bal yimatzeh, once you bring in a non-Jew to the equation, then it's a shvus to shvus, tiltul muktzah is drabanan, asking a non-Jew is drabanan, so it's a shvus to shvus, and makom mitzvah, and it would be mutter, but the Mishnah Berurah says even that's not the minhag. The minhag is, on Yom Tov we don't do anything, we don't use a non-Jew. You find chametz on Yom Tov, you leave it there, you cover it, and you don't touch it until after Yom Tov. The Gemara says, another memra, if you have chametz of a non-Jew in your home on Yom Tov, what do? You make, over Pesach, you make a mechitza asar tvachim mishum heker. You should wall it off. You put a little partition, 10 tvachim high, 40 inches or so off the ground, between you and the chametz. Midaraisa, it's okay, it's the non-Jews chametz, as we discussed previously, not over bal yirah bal yimatzeh, but mishum heker, so you shouldn't come to eat it. You put a heker to avoid eating it on Pesach. The Mishnah Berurah says the mechitza has to be a real solid partition. You shouldn't just hang a curtain, because a curtain that you can just traverse and pass through very easily doesn't do anything for you, so it should be a solid partition. The Mishnah Berurah says that, how does this apply to chametz that you sold? A common case for us, having a non-Jew having chametz in your house is not so common. What is a common case for us is chametz that you actually sold to a non-Jew. So elsewhere, the Shulchan Aruch says that if you sell chametz to a non-Jew, you should actually have the non-Jew remove it from the premises before Yom Tov. Some poskim say that just for the purpose of making a kinyan, to make sure that he legally, halachically acquires the chametz, you should take it out. But assuming you have a valid kinyan, you can leave it in your home on Pesach. But many achronim say no. They say that even though the Gemara says if a non-Jew has chametz in your home, you can leave it there with a partition. But when it's your chametz that you sold to him, and since the non-Jew knows that it used to be the Jew's chametz, even though he made a kinyan, he doesn't really see it so much as yours, and it would look like a fake kinyan. Also, we're afraid since it's the Jew's chametz, he might come to eat it because he knows it's his chametz. He knows he just sold it formally to the non-Jew on Pesach. So according to this shita, if you have chametz in your home, you have to get it out of your house, even if you sell it to a non-Jew. You cannot leave it in your home over Pesach. So the minhag is we don't do that. The minhag is that apparently some understand the Mishnah Berurah is only talking about the Herm. We're talking about where you didn't sell the premises. You just sold the chametz, but it's still your room and your cabinet. Then you can't leave the chametz there. But if you sell the whole cabinet, if you sell the room or the space or the closet where the chametz is, they bring from a Shlomo Zalman Auerbach that you can leave it there. You can leave the chametz there. But you need some kind of mechitza, some kind of hecker. The suggestion he makes, which is I think what people commonly do, is he says that you can either lock it and hide the key. You leave the key in the lock. That is not called locking it, but you can lock it and hide the key, or you can seal it with tape, which is I think very common. That's what we do in my family. We seal some of the things with tape, and you tell your household that this was sold and we don't go in here. So that's enough. That even though when you sell your chametz to the non-Jew, the poskim some poskim are quite stringent. You can't leave it in your house, but if you seal it off somehow with locks or with tape or other things, then it's okay. You don't need a full wall of 10 tefachim. On the other hand, Rav Shlomo Zalman says the chumrah as well. He says that you certainly can't leave the chametz in a space that you use, even if you're going to have a partition. He says you have a closet. The closet has 10 tefachim walls. If you use that closet, you're going in and out of that closet. Then again, there's a concern you may come to eat it. That if you're using that area, you can't leave the chametz in an area that you're going to use. This is a question that comes up. We used to have this in my home where you put the chametz in a garage. You're not planning on going to the garage on Pesach. Then you find you need something from the garage, and you need a bicycle, and you need a box, and you're going in and out of that room. If you actually have chametz there, that's really an issue. You really have to put the chametz somewhere where it's sealed off. Mishnah Berurah does bring in different contexts, if there's a room that you're not using, in various places he says, if you have a room or a home that you're not using, and you leave chametz there, you can do that. You don't have to worry, even if you're not selling the whole house, because you're not going into that room on Pesach. If someone has a shed or a garage that he really isn't planning on using on Pesach, that's okay. But if it is a space that he's going to use, he really has to seal it off. He has to seal it off or seal off that section and seal it off in such a way that it will prevent him from having access to the chametz on Pesach, even though he sold the chametz. The Gemara brings another halacha. All these halachas are from Rabbi Yehuda Marav. So we have another important halacha of Rabbi Yehuda Marav. Someone who's leaving his home before Pesach. He's taking a trip, traveling somewhere else. So more than 30 days before Pesach, you don't have to do bir chametz. You can leave the chametz there. Toch shloshim yom, within 30 days, you have to do bir, you have to do bedika. That's how the Gemara has various complications, but we paskin this basic rule. If a person is leaving his home more than 30 days before Pesach, he doesn't have to do bedika. Within 30 days, he has to do bedika. The bedika that you do more than 30, the bedika that you do, even if it's a couple of weeks before Pesach, within 30 days, you don't make a bracha. Mishnah Berurah explains, because as we're going to see later in the Gemara, the bracha is really al bir chametz. It goes on bir. So the bedika of the night of the 14th, the way we normally do bedika, it's close to the bir, it's the beginning of the bir, you can make a bracha on. But bedika, which is days in advance, he says, you can keep using the chametz, you can keep using the room, he says, that it's not connected to the bir, so it's not part of the bir, so you cannot make the bracha. There is a machlokes at poskim whether if someone is leaving his house entirely and is not going to live in a new house on Pesach, he's going to be in a hotel or in some shared space or on a ship where he's not going to do bedika at all. Some poskim say that then you don't become patur from bedika, that there's a mitzvah of bedika. You're only patur if you have a new house to be bodek, you're going to be in a new house, but if you're not going to do bedika at all, you can't just leave your house and not do bedika. Other poskim say that no, that as long as the person's not going to be in his house, there's no chiyuv bedika. If you're not going to be in the house over Yontif, then there is no chiyuv bedika. Mishnah Berurah brings the Achronim have various opinions on that, but that's when there's no bedika at all. If you're going to have bedika, if you are going to do bedika in a new house, or you're not going to use part of your house, but you have some rooms in your house you're going to do bedika, that's okay. L'kuli alma, as long as you're mekayim the mitzvah of bedika in some rooms and the other rooms are not going to be accessible on Pesach, you don't have to check those rooms. So the Mishnah Berurah brings a major machlokas, which is very relevant to halacha l'masa. Mishnah Berurah brings if a person is selling some rooms in his home, so just you have to do bedika on those rooms. The sale typically happens Erev Pesach in the morning. The Rabbanim sell the chametz Erev Pesach in the morning. So Yud Daled in the evening, bedika's chametz night. It's not sold yet. Do you have to do a bedika then? So the Mishnah Berurah brings the machlokas achronim. Some achronim say at this point, at the night of bedika, it's not sold. You have to do a bedika, even though you're selling that room and all its chametz the next day. Other poskim say no. Since you're planning on selling it, why do a bedika? Why do a bedika? They say that as long as you're doing bedika in some other rooms, they say that when you sell it tomorrow, that itself will be beer chametz. That's good enough. You don't have to worry about checking. As long as you're checking some rooms, the rooms that you sell, you don't have to check. There are achronim on both sides of this. There are achronim on both sides of this. The Mishnah Berurah says, though, it's better if you plan on selling some space, some rooms, so one of your homes, you should really ideally sell that before the night of B'dikas Chametz on the 13th or earlier of Nisan. There are some Rabbanim who do what they call a Mechiras Yud Gimel, an early Mechira to account for this Mishnah Berurah, to account for these Achronims, the people who don't want to be bodek those areas, they can say it's already sold. But most Rabbanim do just one ordinary B'dika on Yud Daled. Some people do an early B'dika for people who are traveling to Eretz Yisrael, and Pesach starts earlier. But most Rabbanim don't do a Mechiras Yud Gimel, in which case you have to rely on the lenient opinion. If you want to say, I'm not going to check that space, because the rabbi's going to sell it, so you have to rely on, it's Mikra Din, it's okay, the Mishnah Berurah says, to rely on the opinion that if it's being sold, even if it's not sold yet, you don't have to be bodek in that place. But again, this is it's better if you're bodek at least someplace, at least in the new home you're going to be in on Pesach, or some rooms in your house. As long as you bodek something, then that is, then according to many poskim, you don't have to be bodek at all. The rooms that you're selling, again, it's better if you sell before the Zman B'dika, but even if you don't, you can be lenient, the poskim say. Another memra of Rabbi Yehuda Marav, the Gemara says, "Habodek tzarich sheyavatel." Even though we do b'dikas chametz, we also have to do bittul. Why? If you're bodek and you found everything, then what's the problem? So the Gemara says it is gzeira. The Gemara tries different things. The Gemara says it's gzeira. You may find a gluska yafa, an attractive item of chametz on Pesach, v'date ilaveh. What does that mean? So Rashi explains that you'll feel a twinge of regret. You won't want to say, I'm going to destroy it, I'm going to burn it, you're going to keep it around. And if you keep it even for one moment, you'll be over by Yirah at that point. When you find it and it's there and you weren't mevatel it, then if you don't burn it even for a moment, that's by Yirah by Yimatzeh. If you're mevatel, you're not over because that fulfills tashbisu according to Rashi, that chametz is not a problem. This is of course what we do. We do both b'dikas chametz and bir chametz and bittul chametz. The night of B'dika, after the B'dika, you're Mavatel, you say all the chametz that I haven't seen, that I don't know about, should be Batel. The Mishnah Berurah, the Ramah says you should say the Bitul in a language that you understand. And he said it's a good idea, the Shulchan Aruch says, to do Bitul again the next morning, which is what we do, because you have chametz that you leave over. At the night, you're only Mavatel the chametz that you don't know about, you're saving some chametz for breakfast the next morning, you're saving some chametz to burn. So for any of that chametz, the bittul didn't go on that. If you leave any of that over, you should say bittul again the next morning. That's our minhag. We say one bittul chametz after bedika on the night of the bedika. We say another bittul the next morning, a more general bittul. The morning bittul we say whether I saw it, whether I didn't see it. The bittul is absolute and universal. Everything is batal. So Ramah said you should say bittul in the language you understand. Because bittul is hefker. If you don't know what you're doing, it's not a tefillah, it's not a magic incantation. You have to know what you're saying. If you don't know what you're saying, then it doesn't work. Mishnah Berurah therefore recommends people who are not familiar with Lashon Kodesh, people laymen, people who are not familiar with Hebrew or Aramaic, as the case may be, they should say the bittul in a language they understand. The Mishnah Berurah gives you the text of bittul in Yiddish, Alon Chametz, Oder Zoyer Tug, was is in mein Rishus, and so on. And people today sometimes say it in English. My father always used to have the family say it in English because if you don't understand it, then it's not worth a whole lot. So it's better to say it in a language that you understand. Mishnah Berurah says in Amaretz, who says it in Lashon Kodesh, even if he can't translate all the words accurately, if at least he knows the general idea of what bittul is, that he's mafkir, that he's relinquishing ownership, it's good enough, even if he can't translate word for word. If he doesn't know what he's doing at all, he thinks it's a tchina, he thinks it's some kind of prayer or incantation, then you're not yotze even b'diavad. We do bittul again, as we explained in the morning, because You may have bought more bread. Very few people, I don't think very many housewives are going to allow their husband to buy bread on Erev Pesach morning. But also he says you leave over the bread. Now we do. We leave over the bread to burn. We leave over the bread for breakfast and so on. And we're afraid if you miss some of that, you'll be over by Yerah. So that's why we do bittul again the next morning to count, to cover that chametz as well. On Daf Zayin, the Gemara says when you do bedika, you make a bracha. What's the bracha? So curiously enough, the bracha, even though we make it at the time of bedika, the bracha goes on beer, as we mentioned earlier. The Gemara brings two versions, either levaer chametz or the nusach that we do, which is al bir chametz. The Gemara discusses this at some length. The maskana of the Gemara is v'hilchasa al bir chametz. The bracha that we make is al bir chametz, and that is what we do. The halacha is you shouldn't talk between the bracha and the beginning of the bedika, which is what we do for every mitzvah. Anytime you make a bracha on anything, on food, on mitzvah, you don't talk between the bracha and the mitzvah or the and the thing you're doing. Also, the Ramah said, the Shulchan Aruch says you shouldn't even talk about things unrelated to bittul, unrelated to bedikas chametz until you finish the entire bedika. And the reason for that is, he says, because even though make a bracha on bread, once you start eating, you can talk while you eat more bread. But during the bedika, you shouldn't talk at all because you want to focus. You want to make sure you don't miss any spots. Some people do bedika as a kind of quaint ritual, but bedika was intended to be a serious and rigorous inspection of the whole home. We're afraid you'll miss spots if you get distracted and you talk to someone else. So you shouldn't really talk about non-bedika things until you finish the bedika. In terms of b'diavad, so the Mishnah Berurah says if you talk about something which is not related to the bedika between the bracha and the start of the bedika, then you need to make a bracha again. The bracha is batil. B'diavad, if you talk about something related to the bedika between the bracha and the bedika, my candle blew out, get me a new candle or something, please. Then that b'diavad is not a hefsek. After you started doing the bedika, so the Mishnah Berurah says that l'chatchila, the Shulchan Aruch says you still shouldn't talk about non-bedika things, but bedika things, even l'chatchila, you're allowed to talk about during the rest of the bedika. So you're allowed to say, did you check that room yet? How many pieces did you find? Did you find 8? Did you find the one under the lampshade or whatever it is? So once you start doing the bedika, you're allowed to talk about things related to the bedika, but you're not really supposed to talk about anything else. You shouldn't start talking about your Pesach plans or the news or your job or anything else during B'dika Summits, which can be quite a feat, especially if you do a long and serious B'dika. It can last for hours, several hours. You're really not supposed to talk during the entire B'dika about matters unrelated to the B'dika. How practical that is, whether people do that, I am not sure. We make the bracha of al bir chametz, even though we make the bracha at the time of the B'dika. As we explained earlier, the B'dika is really the preliminary, it's the first step of the beer. So you make the bracha on the beer. Why don't you make a bracha on B'dika itself, al B'dika's chametz? Because bedika is only a means to an end. It's not, you haven't really accomplished anything by bedika until you burn it. That's not the mitzvah yet. We don't make a bracha on bittul because bittul is belev, bittul is internal. We don't make a bracha on dvarim shebelev. On daf ches, we have a Gemara, it begins on daf zayin, and the daf zayin it says, Ein bodkin lo la'or hachama. We don't do bedika by sunlight, not moonlight, la'or levana, not la'or ha'avuka. We don't use a torch, la'or haner, the light of a lamp, a candle. Why? Candlelight is good for bedikas chametz. Contemporary poskim debate, what about electric light? What about a flashlight or some kind of electric illumination? Many poskim say that that's fine. Rav Yashiv said an electric light is fine if it has a narrow beam that can shine. You shouldn't just use the room light, but if you have a flashlight, something that has a beam, a focused beam that can shine into the cracks and everything, and that's not blinding, that won't prevent you from being able to see the chametz in there. If you have an appropriate light, an appropriate flashlight, Rav Yashiv held that's fine. Rav Aaron Kotler they bring, Rav Moshe Feinstein held that it's fine. Some even say Rav Moshe held that a flashlight is better than a candle. However, there are also some poskim who say that flashlights are not lechatchila. They bring from Shlomo Zalman Auerbach that he said, lechatchila, you should do bedika the traditional way, the way it was always done with candles. You should not use an electric lamp. If you can't, all poskim, or virtually all poskim, agree that if you can't, for whatever reason, if you can't use a candle, then you can use electricity. But some poskim say that candles, that electricity is fine, or even lechatchila. Other poskim say that candles are lechatchila. Some poskim say that even if you shouldn't use a flashlight entirely, you should stick to the traditional method of candle. You can use the electric, the flashlight for help to help you with the bedika. The Rabban Zion Abba Shaul, the great Svardik posik, says again you shouldn't use the flashlight entirely, but you can use it to assist your candle. He goes so far as to say If a person does not have a candle, he should be bodek without a bracha. What about leaving the room light on? So should you leave the room light on or off when you do bedikas chametz? The custom I grew up with, that I've always seen, that I took for granted, was that you turn the room light off, that it should be dark in the room except for your candle or flashlight. There are actually apparently a number of contemporary poskim who say that it's actually a good idea to leave the room light on, if it'll help you be bodek. If you can see better, you should actually leave the room light on. Sounds like a chiddush to me. The Gemara said earlier in Daf Daled, the Gemara said that the reason we do bedika at night is because candles are more effective at night. During the day, when the sun is shining, candles won't be as effective. A powerful electric overhead lighting can be pretty strong, so I'm not sure why don't we have the same problem. The candle or the flashlight won't be as effective if you have the whole room illuminated, but that's what many contemporary poskim say, that on the contrary, it's good actually to leave the room light on. Some poskim, again, we discussed machlokes of poskim, whether you can be bodek with a flashlight. So some poskim say you can't, and some poskim say that if you want to satisfy both schools, you can start using the flashlight, start using a candle, and then switch at some point to using a flashlight. The Mishnah of the Gemara had a rule that a makom shein machnisin b'chametz, a place that you don't normally bring chametz into, doesn't need bedika. What are examples of that? The Gemara talks about different types of holes that are high up or low down, that are too high or too low, people to easily reach. Chametz doesn't get there, so you don't have to worry, you don't have to check those places. The post can bring a Yerushalmi, from the Talmud Yerushalmi. Shuls and Batei Midrash need bedika because sometimes they bring chametz in, they have certain sudas there. Today we have chametz. Some shuls have food in the social hall, but not in the sanctuary, but the kids bring food there. My son brings his granola bars and his pretzels there he used to bring sometimes. So there is some food in the shuls, and therefore the shuls need bedika, and that I think is the minhag, that people do bedika on shuls. But the post can say, because of this idea that when chametz sometimes gets in there, even though it's not a place that's devoted to food, designated for food, post can therefore say, our shuls need bedika as well, the Beis Yosef brings, because the kids bring food there. As we said, kids bring their nash there, so it's the kids, you need bedika in the shul. The Shulchan Aruch brings this halacha that if you have the low holes and the high holes, you don't need bedika. Below 3 tvachim, we say, it's too low, too close to the ground, people don't put things there. The Achronim bring, but if there's kids around, then you need bedika even in those places, because kids get chametz in all kinds of places. And that's why contemporary poskim say that the Mishnah Berurah says, where there are kids around, then you need to do bedika even in those low places. Rav Nissen Karelitz says that's why places like bathrooms and showers, he says, adults don't bring chametz there, but kids do sometimes, he said. The kids bring chametz in all kinds of places. Contemporary poskim warn you that when there are kids, the definition of a makom shemachnisin bo chametz can become significantly expanded. The Gemara talks about the holes, about being bodik in these holes. So the Gemara says you don't have to stick your hands into certain kinds of holes because of sakana, because it's dangerous. Why is it dangerous? The Gemara brings a couple of explanations. One explanation is sakanas akrav, there are scorpions hiding in those holes. Another explanation is there is a concern for kishuf, for sorcerous problems that can happen having to do with the holes. So on both these Gemara, both examples of sakanas akrav, of the scorpions and the kishuf, the Gemara raises the objection, shluchei mitzvah eina nizokin. People engaged in the performance of mitzvahs will not suffer injury. So what are we worried about sakana? They're protected, shluchei mitzvah. So on the first case of sakanas akrav, the Gemara says there's a concern that after you finish the bedika, you'll do something else. You'll say, oh, while I'm here, I lost a needle there. I'm going to start looking for a needle. You're not doing the mitzvah anymore, then the akrav will get you. So in Achanami, while you're doing bedika, the Gemara seems to say you wouldn't have to worry about scorpions, but the concern is you'll, just like people sometimes segue from Pesach cleaning to spring cleaning, so there's a concern you'll segue from bedikas chametz into looking for a lost needle, and then the akrav will get you. The Gemara brings the other pshat, sakanas kshafim, related to sakana from nachrim, from non-Jews, will cause trouble with kishuf. The Gemara again asks, shluchim mitzvah eina nizokin. So here the Gemara brings a famous qualifier on the rule of shluchim mitzvah eina nizokin. It says, shchiach hazeka shiny. If the danger is shchiach, if it's common, if it's a significantly likely danger, we no longer have the protection of shluchim mitzvah eina nizokin. The practical import, the parameters of shluchim mitzvah eina nizokin, along with a related principle of shomer mitzvah l'yeda davara, someone who is observing a mitzvah will not suffer any bad consequence. So Achronim have all kinds of, Achronim debate what various parameters of this. First of all, the Achronim ask that on the second Gemara, of the kishuf, the Gemara says, oh, that's shchiach, so you don't say shluchim mitzvah and nizokin. On the first Gemara of the akra, of the scorpion, when the Gemara asked about shluchim mitzvah and nizokin, the Gemara didn't say it's shchiach. So why not? Some achronim say, because scorpions weren't so shchiach. The Bach says scorpions were not that shchiach, so they didn't rise to the level of shluchim mitzvah of shchiach hazeka. The Ola Shabbos has an interesting idea. The Ola Shabbos says, a Baal Bechira, a human who has autonomous control, who has free will, that's called Shchiach HaZeka. Scorpions, which are not a Baal Bechira, scorpions is not considered Shchiach HaZeka. This is related to a famous doctrine that the Achronim say with regard to Parshas Vayeshev, next week's Parsha. They say that the brothers said, let's not kill Yosef, let's throw him into the pit. And there were scorpions in the pit. How is that not killing him? What's the difference if they take a knife to him or if they throw him into a pit full of scorpions? But some of the Kabbalists, the Rechaim HaKadosh, they bring from the Alshich, say that a Baal Bechira can kill people even if it wasn't decreed min hashamayim. That's called Shchiach HaZeka, the Ola Shabbos says. But scorpions, they have no free will. They do what God wants them to do. So if he doesn't deserve death, he won't get killed. So it's fairer to Yosef, it's more just to throw him into a pit full of scorpions than to actually kill him ourselves. The Ola Shabbos says that's why scorpions are not called Shchiach HaZeka, and people who do kishuf are called Shchiach HaZeka. This question of what's called Shchiach HaZeka, when do we say Shluchim Mitzvah and Nizokin, when do we say Shomer Mitzvah Li'ed Davara, has received a lot of attention in the era of coronavirus with different types of minyanim or other mitzvahs that may involve some danger. Poskim have discussed, Moshe Shol Klein of Bnei Brak had a major tshuva on it a while back. When do we invoke the principle of Shluchim Mitzvah and Nizokin, of Shomer Mitzvah Li'ed Davara? When do we say Shchiach HaZeka? What's the threshold of Shchiach HaZeka? So it's hard to define. The Bach is telling us scorpions are not called Shchiach HaZeka. But the Achronim have a number of other debates about the parameters of Shar Mitzvah Li'ed Davara and so on. Some say that Shar Mitzvah Li'ed Davara, that one who observes a mitzvah will not suffer, is limited to people who have very pure intentions. They do the mitzvah lishma and are always consistently meticulous about the performance of the mitzvah, and they're very careful their entire life, but it does not apply to necessarily ordinary people who happen to be doing a mitzvah. That very much limits Shar Mitzvah Li'ed Davara. The simple reading of the Gemara seems to say anyone doing B'dikas Chametz is not going to suffer. It doesn't say only these great tzaddikim. So other occurrence, it applies to anyone. Some say that Shar Mitzvah Li'ed Davara is only if you have no choice. But if you have an option, you shouldn't rely on Shar Mitzvah Li'ed Davara. Other poskim, though, there's a Taz. The Taz says that in a case where it's a bona fide mitzvah, a person who is going to avoid doing the mitzvah, a person he's talking about mayim shalanu, water drawn for making matzah that has a certain problem of danger associated with it. The Taz says if you spill out that water, you're being mezalzel in the mitzvah, and you're showing that you don't believe the theology of Shar Mitzvah Li'ed Davara. You're the skeptic who doesn't believe that Hashem will protect you, and you're dismissing the biblical promise of Shar Mitzvah Li'ed Davara, and that's wrong. Maybe partly because it's zilzal in the mitzvah, but partly the Taz says you are expressing theological skepticism toward the guarantee of Shar Mitzvah Li'ed Davara. Some poskim argue that Shar Mitzvah Li'ed Davara is limited to concerns of skula, like the kishuf and some of the other examples in the poskim, limited to dangers that are paranormal, that are not ordinary natural dangers. But natural dangers, we don't say Shar Mitzvah Li'ed Davara. Some say that's because natural dangers are always considered Shchiach HaZeka. The problem is our Gemara says scorpions. Our Gemara introduces the idea of Shar Mitzvah, of Shluchim Mitzvah and Nizokin on scorpions, so it's not clear how that works. Other poskim seem to say we have to evaluate that. Other poskim say the real criterion is we have to evaluate how significant the danger is in a case, how shchiach is it, and that's really, I think, the bottom line. According to many poskim, we have to evaluate how shchiach, how serious the danger is. On Dafim Tes and Yud, the Gemara talks about putting away the possibility that a chulda, an animal, may grab one of your pieces of chametz and take it somewhere. You'll have to look for it again. So the Gemara brings a rule that a person who does bedika but wants to keep some chametz around should carefully put it away so a chulda shouldn't take it. There are complicated rules. What happens if the chulda did take it? But l'chatchila, you should put your chametz someplace where a chulda will not take it. And if the chulda does take it and you see he runs off with it and you don't know where it went, then you're going to have to do bedika again. This is brought in Shulchan Aruch. After bedika, a person should put away the chametz carefully. You shouldn't leave it lying around. So you shouldn't have to do another bedika. If you see that one of your pieces is missing, you're going to have to do another bedika. Mishnah Berurah explains that not just after bedika, during bedika, when you find a piece of chametz, you shouldn't just leave it lying around because maybe it'll get lost again. That's why we put them in these little bags. We put the chametz carefully. We seal them up so they shouldn't scatter and get lost and create problems. Whatever you're leaving over for the next day, whatever you found, the Gemara says, put away carefully for the next day. This applies both, Mishnah Berurah says, both to the chametz that you found during the bedika that you're going to burn tomorrow, as well as the chametz that you're saving for breakfast the next morning. He says that people have a minhag, they only put away the chametz they find during the bedika, but not the chametz they plan on eating. That's not a good idea, because that chametz can also get lost and cause problems. So you should put away all the chametz. You should carefully maintain a chain of custody on all the chametz, because if it gets lost, that's not going to be good. What happens if it does get lost? If it gets lost, you have to do a new bedika. So mkafal of kli v'lo matzo. However, so if you just put it somewhere and it disappeared, then you have to do a new bedika to find the piece that was missing. However, if you covered it properly and one of the pieces is missing, you don't have to worry, because it couldn't have just disappeared by itself. An animal can't get into a covered piece of chametz. Depends what kind of animal, what kind of cover, I guess, but minastam, animals don't get into covered chametz. You assume a person took it and ate it. And you don't have to go do a new bedika. However, the Mishnah Berurah says, again, children are a problem, because children take things and scatter them. So even if you covered your chametz, you closed the bag, whatever you did, an animal can't get in, but if you have little kids around, they might have gotten in and ran around the house with the chametz, and left it somewhere. So the lesson is, be careful if you have kids, certainly, to keep the custody of your chametz, keep it secure. On Daf Yud, the Gemara talks about, again, one of these cases, you have the chametz, and an achbar, a mouse, ran off with some chametz. You know he went to one of two houses, you didn't see which one. If you know the chametz is in one of the two houses, the Gemara draws an analogy to the case of Shnei Shvilim. The Gemara talks about there are two paths. We know there's tumah under one of the paths, and people walked on both paths to the destination. So one of them is tameh and one of them is not. So the Gemara says, at least the Gemara says, that really each one is a suffix, and the suffix here, the halacha is mutter. So if only one person went on one path, it would be mutter. What if two people went on two different paths? We know they went on different paths. We know that one of them is vadei tameh and one of them is vadei tahar. So the Gemara says, it depends. That we paskin that if they ask the shaila separately, each one is tar. Each one asks the Rav, am I tar? The Rav says tar. And even if they both come out with tar, that's the way it works. But if they ask b'bas achas, if they both asked, if together they both came to the Rav and said, we both went on these paths, I went on this one, he went that one, what's our halacha? Then they're going to both be tameh. Because since that would be a tar to disastre, that would be mutually inconsistent, and they're both here together, then we have to be machmer. Tosha says it's only a chomer d'Rabbanan, but that's the din. D'Rabbanan no d'Oraisa, that's the din. If they come to ask the shaila together, we have to be machmer on both of them. If they ask separately, we can make for each one. The post can bring the Meiri has an interesting application of this distinction. Meiri is talking about the famous machlokas and brachos, whether you can daven mincha up till shkia and marav after shkia, or mincha up till plaga mincha and marav after plaga mincha. The Gemara says, the Ovid Kamar Ovid, the Ovid Kamar Ovid. We're allowed to follow either opinion. You can either, most shuls, the daven bizman, typically daven mincha right before shkia and marav right after shkia, but you can also daven mincha before plag and marav after plag. That's what we do. We make an early Shabbos. Ideally, we daven mincha before plag and marav after plag. Can you do both? Can you switch back and forth? Can you daven one day mincha before plag and marav after plag, and the next day mincha before shkia and marav after shkia? Some poskim allow that. Some poskim say that's also included in David Kamar Abed. You can pick one day, you can consider plag your dividing line, and one day consider shkia your dividing line. The same day, though, to daven mincha before shkia and after plag, and marav also before shkia and after plag, that's tar to disastre, because the same day, either plag is the cutoff or shkia is the cutoff. So that most poskim say you can't do. But some poskim say from one day to the next you can switch. You can daven during the week, you can daven mincha before shkia and marav after shkia. And Erev Shabbos, you can daven mincha before plag and marav after plag. Erev Shabbos, there are other reasons for leniency, but the question is, can you switch from one day to the next? So some poskim say yes. Meiri says, what's the difference between being tar to disastre, between being mutually inconsistent within the same day and switching from one day to the next? So he says, because one day is like Shnei Shvilim b'bas achas. People come together the same day, you can't do tar to disastre. But different days, even though it's logically not consistent, it doesn't matter. If it's on different days, it's like people come to ask the shaila separately, then you can have psakim which are mutually inconsistent as long as they're issued separately. That's an interesting application of the idea of Shnei Shvilim. So, Daf Yud Aleph and Yud Beis, the Gemara has a lengthy sugya. The Mishnah begins by telling you the rules of how long you're allowed to eat chametz and have from chametz. Mishnah brings machlokas Tanaim, Rav Meir, and Rabbi Yehuda. We pass like Rabbi Yehuda. Ochlin kol arba. You can eat chametz the first 4 hours of the day. Tolin kol chamesh. You have to stop eating after 4 hours, but you can still have hana and sell the chametz for the 5th hour. Sarfim b'tchila sheish, beginning of the 6th hour, it's completely aser, and then the chametz has to be burned. That's how we paskin. Why? Midaraisa, there's no iser at all until chatzos, 6 hours into the day. So why are we adding these earlier hours? The Gemara brings a variety of explanations. One of the earlier explanations is Adam Toa Shtei Shos or so, different variations, exactly how much they're Toa, how much a person makes a mistake, but a person can make a mistake, be off by up to 2 hours, especially back then before they had clocks. So in order to make sure you don't hit chatzos, they said stop earlier because a person can make a mistake of up to 2 hours. The final pshat, the Ikr lahalacha is, Rava says later on Daf Yud Beis, Gzeira Mishum Yom HaMu'unan. They used to tell time by the sun. If it was cloudy, they wouldn't know exactly when it was. It's not simply a mistake of 2 hours. It has to do with not being able to see the sun. This is how we pass in the Shulchan Aruch. From 6 hours and above, that's Asur Bahana, that's even Daraisa, from Chatzos, from halfway through the day. Midrabanan, the Chum added 2 more hours. From the end of the 4th hour, beginning of the 5th hour, it's Asur Bachila, Mutter Bahana, you're allowed to sell it at that time. And from the beginning of the 6th hour, it's Asur Bahana, and you have to destroy it. Now we paskin that it is because of Yom HaMu'unan, because it has to do with it being cloudy. We paskin that these 4 hours and 5 hours are Sha'os Manios. The longer day, the hours will be longer. It depends when of the year Pesach falls out, earlier or later. It is 4 hours into the day means a third of the day, and 5 hours into the day means 5/12 of the day. So you calculate based on the actual day. The hours are not fixed hours. The Yesh Omrim, the Ramah says that no, they are fixed hours. That until 2 fixed hours before Chatzos, it is mutter, and it depends on 2 fixed hours. So why would it depend on fixed hours? So the Bir Halacha explains that that 2 hours is actually a kula. At that time of the year, in the northern hemisphere, 2 hours is actually going to be, the day is a little bit longer than 12 hours. The day is going to be a little bit longer than 12 hours. So having to wait 4 hours, so 4 hours shows manios is more than 2 60-minute hours from Chatzos. And the kula of the Trumas Hadashin, the kula of that opinion is you only have to stop 2 hours before Chatzos. And the reason is because we follow the other opinion of the Gemara. You're allowed to rely on the other opinion of the Gemara that it doesn't have to do with cloudy or the size of the hours. It's a person can err up to 2 hours. A person's mental clock can be off by 2 hours, but his mental clock is based on two 60-minute hours. That's how much margin of error he has, not based on the hours of the day, not based on the sun or anything. So that's fixed, 2 hours. So there's a leniency to be makil up to 2 hours before Chatzos, even if it is more than a third of more than four shows manios into the day. Mishnah points out these numbers are true for the northern hemisphere, but for the southern hemisphere for the summer hemisphere, for the southern hemisphere where the days are less than 12 hours, if the day of Pesach ever falls out on less than 12 hours, if Erev Pesach ever falls out on a less than 12-hour day, then the Chumrah and Kula would be reversed, and then the Chumrah and Kula would be reversed, and in that case 2 hours would be a Chumrah, and the shows Manios would be a Kula. Mishnah says the Ikra din is we follow the opinion that it shows Manios. So in the case where 2 hours would be a Chumrah, you anyway don't have to pass like that, because anyway the halach is that you get shows Manios. But in the standard case where 2 hours where 2 shows Shavos would be a Kula, so Mishnah talks about whether you can make it on that. He says that the Mishnah Sachra is that Kasva Poskim, the Iker is Kedei Rishana, that you only get until Shlish Hayom. You should only sell chametz until Shlish Hayom. But Diavad, if you didn't sell and it's Hefsin Meruba, he says you can be Selmech on the Trumas Hadashin, that if it's within 2 60-minute hours of or 1 hour of 60-minute hours of Chatzos, if it's still not within that window, you get a little bit of extra time. That the sale is that you can sell until 1 60-minute hour before Chatzos. How do you measure? We use Shos Manios, though, for most purposes here. So we're going to most poskim. How do you measure? Mishnah Berurah brings Machlokes, Magen Avram, and the Gon, whether you measure 12 hours from sunrise to sunset, from Neis to Shkia, or 12 hours from Alos HaShachar until Tzeis HaKochavim, and from when you start counting that. First of all, how do you calculate the hours based on the day defined from sunrise to sunset, or the day defined from Alos to Tzeis, and also when do you start counting those 3 hours, those 4 or 5 hours from Alos HaShachar until Neis. So this is the same machlokas people will be familiar with from Kriya Shema. We have the Gon's Man Kriya Shema, the Magen Avram's Man Kriya Shema. Shuls typically announce the Gon's Man Kriya Shema. People are lenient to follow the Gon, but Poskim can recommend for Kriya Shema that a person be stringent and daven according to the earlier Zman, which, as is often calculated, 36 minutes before the Gon's Man Kriya Shema. Here too, the Mishnah Berurah says that many Achronim say that you count from Alos HaShachar until Tzeis HaKochavim. So the hours are a little bit longer, but you start counting much earlier from Alos HaShachar, and that's a chumrah. Mishnah Berurah recommends l'chatchila a person should be machmer to count the 4 and 5 hours into the day for the sof zman achila and sof zman bia and sof zman hana. They should count according to the Magen Avram the earlier zman from Alos HaShachar, and not like the Gon l'chatchila at least, and not to count from. Not to rely on counting from Nates.